you beautiful people, and thanks for tuning in. Today we're speaking with Nina Sossamon Pogue. Nina is a sought-after speaker, best-selling author, and podcast host, dedicated to helping individuals and companies thrive through tough times. Nina was a member of the USA Gymnastics team, then became an award-winning journalist, an Emmy award-winning television news anchor. Nina has become known for her ability to take on tough challenges, manage life's unexpected plot twists, and still reach new levels of success. Nina makes you feel like you can handle anything life throws at you, and she gives you a framework to handle anything that gets in your way. Let's uncover what's behind the armor with Nina.
You and I share a love of storytelling, and much of our story comes from our own experiences and how we have met challenges and adversity in some of the darkest times of our life. Nina, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. And yes, we do have a lot of commonalities and our, current path too of trying to put some goodness out in the world.
So grateful you're here with me. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Nina, there's so much parts of your story and framework that are really impactful for me and for listeners, because so many of us, when we're curled up in the corners of our garage in a fetal position crying, need to find that one thing to just get us through. And you remind me in those times, you got this.
I have a strong belief that we have this inner strength that's, sometimes hard to tap into, hard to find in those really difficult times. But sometimes when I'm sitting with someone who's in one of those spaces, and not a therapist, I'm not a professional in this space. I just become somebody that people come to. I'll often tell them, it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay this way. Like, you got to sit in the funk for a little bit, but then you got to figure out how to move forward. And some of what I think is really important is taking people out of their own heads in that moment and getting them to a better place. So even if it's like one of my kids who are adults, one of their friends who's in a bad spot, we'll sit on the end of the dock and I'll be like, okay, I know it all feels like crap right now and everything seems ruined and you don't see a path forward, but let's just play it forward. Like, didn't you say you wanted to get a dog at one point? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, when you grow up, what kind of dog would you have? And they'd say, this kid, actually one in particular I'm thinking of, he's like, I want a black lab. And I said, well, what would you name it? He goes, oh, like a person's name, like Eric. I said, well, 5 years from now, when you and Eric are running down the beach, this is not going to feel like it feels right now. Like, it's not going to be this. And yes, it's all super crappy right now and you don't see a way out and you're just sad and mad and shame and all the things. But sometimes you can get people out of their own head. That's a lot of what I try to do with people in those tough situations.
Well, let's build in some credibility, because on this subject, you have a life experience of it. I want to go back for a moment, if you would. In the period of, let's call this Nina 1.0, in your U.S. gymnastics career, you're a young gymnast performing at the highest levels. What's life like for you? What does it look like to be Nina during this time before you met your first dark night?
Well, I moved away from home at 13. So here I was, this really promising young gymnast in Florida, and I'd won the state championships and all the things I could win down there. And I moved away from home and moved into an Olympic training center. And I'm on top of the world. I mean, I'm 13 years old. They're 13, 14, 15. Those 3 years, I make the U.S. team. I'm traveling the world. I get the USA sweats, the cool ones. They send you a big box with all this stuff in it. And so I get the USA sweats, and I'm going to Japan and Hungary and Germany and all over the world. And I'm with, Mary Lou Retton and Bart Connor and all the people that people, you remember their names now. And I'm having an amazing experience, just being a part of that world and gearing up for the 84 games. I was modeling bathing suits and sportswear and leotards. And like, I was just a kid, but I was really in a really happy place in my life.
When you're performing, I want to understand how you're feeling emotionally. What is your emotional well-being at 13, 14, competing at these highest levels, traveling all swagged up in USA? And I'm sure I could appreciate that it has to be proud. But I just know that when I was performing at those levels, which only occurred at a much later age, sometimes it's also the time I felt the most lonely and disconnected. So I was just wondering what was going on in at your age. How were you handling that life?
It was one of those times in my life when I look back now where I was never really alone. But just because you're not alone doesn't mean you're not lonely.
Mm.
So there were always people around me. There were always other athletes around me. I had my coaches around me. And I had a husband and wife coach and their children who were always in the gym and a part of it. I sort of became part of their family. So I wasn't, I probably missed the chance to be alone. I think I recharge alone. But as far as the mental state of feeling lonely, I did feel like it was me against the world. You do feel like it's all up to you and the pressure is on you. I felt a lot of pressure having put my family in that position, moving. I was the youngest of four kids to leave the house. Felt a lot of pressure to succeed for my family. I felt even in my school, they would announce, "Hey, Nina's on ABC Wild World of Sports this weekend." And so I felt that this weekend, I would feel that pressure. So one was proud and also was always so fearful of screwing up. Like there
Mm.
was a real fear because there was so much expectation. There was a real fear of screwing up, and one that I never shared with anyone. You just smile and pretend you got a handle on everything. But that fear of failure, was heavy when you're a kid.
And I have teenage children, and so I can really appreciate the fear that they have on some of the what we would consider now the small things. But there are a lot to them within their own groups and a picture or a video or a Snapchat that, whatever. And it wasn't anything on top of like balance beam, all the cameras, all the lights, and Nina is up there. You can't hide, right? And so I was wondering, how did you find ways to work through that fear? Were they healthy? Were they unhealthy? Uh, What would you say to your younger self, your 1.0 now, in dealing with that fear as a teenager, which I think would help so many others? I know my children.
Yeah, great question. I actually have a whole chapter on this in my first book. That concept, and I didn't realize it till years later. So what I would say to my younger self was, it's all going to be okay. Like it all plays out as it's going to. You only have control over so many things. At the time, I did work with a sports hypnotist, and I would do a thing with my fingers to calm myself down. I would start with my pinkies and go up to my thumbs and back down. I could do that even in the middle of a routine. It was not something noticeable. I could be on the beam and sort of like, whoo, it would reset me. So I had a couple of little tricks that I did to get those nerves under control. I did some deep breathing would help me get my nerves under control. And it was more nerves than anything else that I was managing through, people helped me through at the time. Now, what I talk about now is why I can look back now and I can see, like you said, you and I see it differently. It doesn't seem so big. When I was, well, we haven't gotten there yet, but when I was in college and doing gymnastics, if you look at it, if we play it forward, when I no longer did gymnastics, I had a career-ending injury later after in college. I was 19. And if I can take that 19 years of my life and I look at how much time I'd spent in a gym, it was 75% of my whole life. So of course it felt like everything was ruined and everything. It was 75% of what I knew about life.
Right.
And like today, the kids have their Instagrams and their Twitter accounts and their or whatever accounts they call them now, and their TikTok accounts and stuff.
Yeah.
They identify as this sport or whatever their passion is, music or whatever. They're out there with it. Back then, it was like bumper sticker on my car and my sweatshirt. So when I lost that identity as a sport, or when something bad would happen, say someone listening has a fall, it feels big because it's all you know in life. So
Yeah.
19, I lose a sport. It's 75% of everything I know.
Right.
It feels huge. When I am 50 and my kids left for college, I can look back now and I can say, oh, that was 28% of my life.
Right.
It's not my whole life. And if I live
Right.
to be 100, which I need to drink less wine and take better care of myself, but if I live to be 100, then it's only 15%. So the math plays with us a little bit.
But and we'll get into this because it doesn't feel that way in the moment.
No.
In those dark nights, wow, it doesn't feel like to say, well, I just lost 3/4 of my identity, but I know it's going to work out for a reason,
Yeah.
right?
Nope.
Tell me about the injury and what happened.
So, well, before the injury, I do want to fill in the blanks for you because I feel like I jumped ahead too far. So I didn't make the Olympic team. The first big failure, my first big dark night was training for the Olympics all this time, being, on the cover of magazines as an Olympic hopeful and just being very public about it. And then I blew it in the qualifying. I didn't even make the trials that year. The qualifier before the Olympic trials, there's 50 or so young gymnasts in it. I bombed. And back then there was no coming back from one bad meet. It's not like system like they had now. So I don't even make it into. I fall off the bars, horrible fall. Try to keep going. It's just a mess. So I don't even make it to the trials, and I am mortified. Like, I think my life is over at that point. Like, I've wasted my whole life. I've never been to a high school dance. I've never done anything but gymnastics. And I'm 17 years old and I didn't make the Olympics. Like, it was my whole life.
Right. What now?
What now? That's my what now moment. I call them now what. My now what moments. And so that was my first big reset. Now I did regroup and got past all that blame and shame in a very difficult time when you're young and impressionable. And then I got to college and was a top recruit, competed for LSU, had a great experience at LSU. Once again, happy, excited to be there, found my people, proud, all those same emotions as earlier. And then I blew out my knee my freshman year, and it was a career-ending injury. And when that happened, I just, once again, didn't know who I was without the sport. Didn't make all the right decisions. I always joke I would take my Percocet with a shot of Jaeger and like roll myself in my wheelchair into PT. It was not my healthiest decisions. But, I managed to muddle through and I found some good people around me. And I say I graduated in booze and boys, got out of college and had some success in other areas. But losing my sport in that very public way seemed like the end of like everything. It was so big at the time, like so many young people here. And I can go back and see the framework that I've created now. I can go back and see how I used that to get out of it in both those situations.
It's quite a remarkable story, and it's not even halfway over. And the importance of that is that a lot of us will hit a dark night, but there are times where we then ask ourselves why. Like, and it's very easy to go down that pity pot, that comfortable rabbit hole of misery, because it was one thing to have fell and not made the team and lost my identity. But here I spent all that time climbing all the way back up, and it's going to be taken from me again, but this time permanently. What now? And why?
Yeah, and I can get caught in the whys, and that's some people do.
Yeah.
I was not one of those people. So that's one of the reasons I went down this path to research resilience. And I didn't even realize what I was researching until I, got to that word a couple of years into my research. I knew I was looking at a lot of like some stoicism, cognitive behavior therapy, neuroscience. I was trying to figure out why some people get stuck and can't move forward and why other people do. Why are some people more resilient? I was always determined and I would just adapt and believed I could do anything and move on to the next thing. That is not without saying I didn't throw a pity party or two. Don't get me wrong. There were some why moments, and, why me? Earlier in my life, the why me's and these first stories, I think, held on a little longer. Later in my life, the why me's, I just realized this is part of life. And I got to that pretty quickly. And I truly think that there are some people who are wired to be a little more resilient than others. And I just am one of those people who could get to acceptance very quickly through the stages of grief, get to acceptance and move forward. So my why me's, just, became a part of my journey that I can look back now and be thankful for. Those why me moments. I'm truly thankful that I have moved on and had so many other amazing experiences in my life outside of the gym. And some people do one thing for forever, and I certainly haven't done that.
How do you start to scramble and even say what's next? Like, where do you find those options in those moments?
I didn't find options at first. Like I said, I was really in a dark place and just mad at the world, and in a wheelchair and taking my Percocets with Jaeger. I do vividly remember that, and just making poor choices for a while. And then my coach, to keep my scholarship, I had to work at LSU. They don't do that any longer. But when you were an athlete then, in order to keep your scholarship, you had to work for the athletic department. And not being thrilled that I had blown out my knee my freshman year, somehow I ended up in the laundry room. So I'm in the laundry room working, and I'm not talking about gymnastics laundry. I was doing basketball and football. I mean, I probably washed Shaquille O'Neal's jockstrap. That could have been my claim to fame. I could have just stopped at that. My claim to fame.
That's your claim to fame.
That could be my first book. I washed Shaq's jockstrap, but I didn't choose to stay there and make that my claim to fame. But I worked in the laundry room, and I can remember leaning and being outside that laundry room, putting down my crutches, leaning up against the wall, waiting for the laundry to go, sitting in the sunshine, and watching all the other athletes walk to practice wherever, across the campus. That track guys had to pass there, all the people in track. The natatorium was over there, so all the swimmers would be going that way, and the gymnasts, and everybody would be passing where I was sitting, and very few people would even make eye contact. I was just not a fun person to be around, and it was a bummer. I was a bummer, and I was a reminder. So I was very alone and lonely at this point. I do remember that. And one day, in the middle of sitting there, one of the academic counselors plopped down next to me, and he said, "How's it going?" And I made some snipe comment and said, "Fine, it's best ever. This is fun." And he was one of the few people who noticed and started stopping each day and chatting with me until I actually could tell him some things that were true, things that were truly going on with me. And he became an impetus for change for me, to help me find something else to get excited about. The biggest battle when you're in a hole is trying to find something else to get excited about, something else that'll take your brain in a new direction, because you've been spending so much time going passionately in one direction, working towards something. So to find something to take you in a new direction, and he got me there. And then, that's where he planted the seed of working in sports information and doing journalism and writing the stories of all these amazing athletes. And that's where my journalism career started, because now I had something else to get excited about. Now, I ended up getting a degree in communications and not journalism, because my grades were so bad by that point. I was so far behind. I couldn't even get into the J school, which is funny.
That is funny. You remind me of the beauty, the power, and the impact of authentic, vulnerable connection. Like, what would have happened had you not answered that question the way you did?
Yeah, and if he hadn't stopped, all these years later, I look back and think of the pivotal people in my life. Your message of connection is so important. One of the pieces of my 4-part my framework that I share is people. It is your community, your ecosystem, and who's helping and who's hurting, and how you edit those people in and out, and how you do need to pull in people and create some real meaningful connections to get you move you forward. And part of mine is someone's been through this before. Someone sees it differently than you. He obviously could see my struggle very differently from me. He was a grown man. I was a child. And he could see I was sad. And and was willing to let me share like openly sadness with him, which not everybody is willing to do. People don't like to be around sad people sometimes. And so that connection was really key. And throughout my life, even after big trauma and stuff later in my life, like finding a therapist who was good, who I could just say the horrible stuff that was in my head out loud to, like that was really a key to find the right people in my life. And I've edited out people through the years. My first marriage didn't work because that person was not my person. Like I needed a different support system and a different person to be joyful with, like both ends of the spectrum. You also need people to really celebrate your joy and to be there with you in the good times. And so the connection piece is really important part of how you create success after something, after a big down, after a big low.
You are the next part of your life story is this broadcasting component, right? So you launched this now career in journalism, and may I say, just like everything else you've done in your life, incredibly successful at it, award-winning journalist, Emmy award-winning, multiple Emmy award-winning, and just, this is just now a new purpose, passion, love, and it's getting you up in the morning. And now, what does Nina look like in this next version of, her life? We're at this 3.0.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's, I think I lost track of how many Nina 3.0,
You and I
4.0. I have a lot, my release schedule is really strong. I have a very, very short release schedule apparently, 'cause I got a lot going on. Yeah, and I don't even know where the release notes would be on that one. Anyway, that next version of me that comes out, and it becomes this journalist. And I love it. I love being a journalist. I love doing sport. Now, first I started in sports, and I did very quickly realize I didn't love that. They win, they lose, here's the score. Like I wanted more to it than that. So I got really into telling the stories of the athletes. And then I switched over and became a political reporter for a while, and then got into general assignment reporting and did a little bit of everything. So I had an opportunity to really see the world around me in a new way, learn new things every day. Like one day I'd be covering, like riding an elephant down the interstate because the circus was in town. And the next day I'd be at a shooting or a stabbing and learning about the crime in that community. It was just really a constant influx of information. And I just loved it. And I thrived in that setting. And I was willing to do anything. My first job, I don't want people to think I just jumped in there. My first job, I pulled the cords in the studio. I ran the teleprompter and got screamed at all the time by the anchors because I was either too fast or too slow or too something. Like I did. And I logged, I spent 6 months in a closet at a TV station, literally in a giant archive closet, logging in. This is when everything was being put online. Old tapes, like big giant tapes, sitting and watching red car accident, red car, corner of something and something, like typing in all the old stuff into the new computer system. I did that for 6 months. So I proved myself to get an opportunity in a newsroom. And then once I got in there, I fell in love with it. And then I got to do all the really cool stuff and be a part of that world. And then I was a reporter, then I became an anchor, and that was kind of the goal. Now, I will say early on, I didn't want to be an anchor. I was going to be the next Christiane Amanpour, and I was going to travel around the world and speak 5 languages and, be that person. I was truly a journalist, fair, balanced, and accurate. But I got tired of being really poor. So when the anchor job came along, I was like, oh, I could do that. I got nice hair and can doll this up. I got this giant thing. So I really went down that road and leaned into it. And I loved anchoring too. It's a different type of success than Nina during those years, during the on camera, like as a reporter and then as a news anchor. I love that sense of I got the opportunity to tell stories all day, every day, and connect people to the community around them. And I got to choose the language to tell that story. And I got to use words that were compassionate and kind. And it didn't have to be as ugly as the world around us was. It was still fair, balanced, and accurate, but it was back then. It was very fair, balanced, and accurate. And I got to be a through point to kind of take the ugliness, and you still need to know what's going on, but you really didn't need it right in your face every night. And so I became very popular and won a lot of journalism awards and anchoring awards for the way in which I told stories and shared information for the world, with the world, in a really, I guess, kind way. I like to look at it as kind.
Some cosmic bricks, though, come down. And for whatever reason, again, life decides to throw a massive curveball your way, and you're asking what's next again. What happened?
Well, I was a journalist for a long time. It was very popular, as I mentioned. It's, big fish, little pond. It's Charleston, South Carolina. And I won one day. It was a Thursday. I won Charleston's favorite news anchor for the 7th year in a row. So this isn't the big one you're talking about, but then for the 7th year in a row, I won Charleston's favorite news anchor. I'd won, lots of awards. And then on a Friday, that was a Thursday, a Friday, I got called into the news director's office, and he said, and I think he's going to give me like a bonus or something. And he says, we are releasing you from your contract without cause. And so world rocked. I was being let go in a massive layoff. I just was like, didn't realize it was me. Like, I thought I was pretty untouchable at this point. So I get let go. And then that's one of my big down moments. What am I going to do with myself? And I pick myself back up and go to another TV station, have big success. Then that's when I won the Best Newscaster in the Southeast Emmy, which I'm super proud of, because that was after that firing. They went younger and blonder, and I proved I had a little, I'm going to come back at you with this thing.
So and I want to catch that from that one moment, because it's really important, is that here again, to your point and to the books and your framework, which, we're going to talk about, which is this thing could have been really bad.
Yeah.
But the next springboard puts you on essentially a bigger stage. You got a bigger recognition, a bigger award because of that let go.
Yeah. And so I'm in a really good space now. I'm kind of in my zone. I've won this award and I'm top of my game. I'm remarried. I've got 3 little kids. I'm in a really good place. And then I went from reporting the news to being in the news. A horrific accident that sometimes I'll talk about, and it's a little triggery, so I won't share the whole thing out in front of your audience unless you would like me to. I've shared it from the stage before. It's sort of a give or take whether or not you want to go down that road. But I was involved in an accident that had me really questioning, and with news trucks on my front lawn, and I became part of the news, that had me really questioning, this was my why me moment. Like, how come I've had all this success and gotten through all these things, and now you've put me in this place with so much sadness that I was just in a dark place, and I wanted to end my life. Like, I remember standing in front of a mirror with a razor. I'd been off the air for a few weeks. I remember standing in front of a mirror with a razor thinking, if I just slice up my face, I won't be pretty and they won't want me, to come back and do this. And then I thought maybe the whole world would just be better without me, my kids. I was just such in a dark place and so unhappy, and saw no way that I could ever be happy again. I just couldn't see any happiness in the future at this point. And so I was in a very scary, dark place for a while. And that's when, I had to get a really good therapist and reset expectations on what life was going to look like. Because when something big happens, and this was a big traumatic experience, the me before, I just wanted to go back. I wanted to be, everybody loves Nina. I want to go back and be that person. Like Charleston's favorite news anchor, former, world-class athlete. Like, I wanted to be like great mom. I wanted to be that person. I didn't want to be this new person that now had this new label and this new way in which people looked at me. I just didn't want to be that person in the future, and I wanted to go backwards, and I felt very stuck in that moment, which is part of what my framework that I offer now is. It helps people get forward out of that moment. Like, how do you move forward when everything ahead of you just looks bleak?
I appreciate so much your vulnerability and your candor, and I don't need for theatrics to get into the story, and I certainly don't want to trigger you, but I would love to get a little behind the armor on it, because this is the moment. So if it wasn't falling off and knocking down the opportunity from the U.S. Olympic team, if it wasn't an injury that took away the sport and the identity altogether, if it wasn't going to be this firing, all of these things led to these other moments, yes. But then there are that time when I was curled up on my garage floor and thought to myself, like, maybe that's the way. Like, maybe that's just the fucking way.
Yeah.
Like, and I want to know, did you develop the framework or this award-winning book, This Is Not the End? Which came first? I'm just curious.
Well, the book came 15 years after that the big this, what I call my big this.
Yeah, and that big this led to that framework.
Yes. Well, at that point in my life, I went back and looked at all of these times I'd gotten through it and went, what was the commonality? And then I researched companies who'd gone through dire straits and got out, and individuals who'd had major, like, become paralyzed, and people who had lost children. Like, how did they all get through it? And I found the commonalities. And so the framework is those commonalities. But
So
the book came much later.
You tap into your journalism experience, right? And your ability to tell that story. And it sounds like similar to me. What I did was, after I had my darkest moment and climbed out of it, and then came on the other side of the healing, I thought to myself, could I reverse engineer my own healing to figure out what I did so that I could help others similarly situated? I'm not a therapist. If my story, my framework helps you, I hope so, because it was the one thing that helped me. And that was the connection cure. Cure being consciously aware that we're masked up. You for understanding the reasons why we're not showing up as our authentic self. The next one, R, for renewing the connection, first with yourself and then with others. And then E, for expanding, which is sending out and creating more connections, even with yourself and with others, and watching how that ripple effect can change the world. I'm so interested. What's the framework behind how Nina climbed out and reverse engineered that healing? What's that look like?
And that's a perfect way to put it. I have a very similar path. I reverse engineered it, and I wanted to be able to share it with others. I had become this go-to person that people came to get help. And so I wanted to be able to do more than just one-on-one at the end of my doc or in some meeting room or over a beer, help people. So my framework, I call it this resilience framework. And the word this I use throughout it. And that's why my book is This Is Not the End. And I think we all have thises in life. It gives you the opportunity to put your this into the space. It's for highs and lows. Look, you look at these young kids now who win the Olympics, and they're like, this is the best day of your life. And it gives them nowhere to go afterwards. They need to throw in the word yet, best day yet. So the highs kind of have a now what moment too, along with the lows. But as far as the framework to get out of the lows and get back to that high on the timeline of your life, mine is 4 parts. And it's my 4 tips. People always ask me for tips. So I use the acronym TIPS for this framework. Very simple to remember. And it's TIPS. And it's putting it in a timeline, isolating, pulling the right people, and telling your story. So the timeline piece is, if you draw a line on a piece of paper from 0 to 100, you put your little 10-year marks in between it, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. And you can put whatever you're going through right now. Anyone listening, you can put whatever you're going through right now as a dot on that timeline somewhere. In your big, giant, messy, marvelous life, that's a dot on that timeline somewhere. And so you can see, like, there's all of you before that, and then there's going to be all of you after that, but you're right here. And the concept of the big empty line ahead, that big blank timeline, is pretty magical because you could put anything there. I joke sometimes, like, I'm in my 50s now. I'm like, I could go off the rails. Tomorrow, I could get off of this jet and go, I am just so done with everything and all of these people. I'm done peopling. I'm going to sell my house and buy a Harley. I'm going to get a face tat and dye my hair purple and just take off. I mean, I could totally go off the rails because it's my life. I'm in more control of what's ahead of my timeline than anybody else. And you are too. So the timeline piece is this concept of the timeline and where is it in your big, giant, messy life? Because it's just part of it. It's not your whole life. There's a big blank space ahead. You can't go back. Blank space ahead. And then the next part is isolate. So if you draw
can
that.
I mention one thing on the timeline?
Yeah.
Because my creative brain was like shooting off. Because your book is both books are spectacular. You should have a bookmark. Maybe make a bookmark, right? And it'd be a ruler with the little marks, and the bookmark could say, "This is your life. How many how many thises you've had, or where are you in this?" Like,
That's so good. I love it.
On the other side, your logo or something like that's so great. Like I'd love that bookmark, and it's a daily reminder of reading the book. Like, this is your life. It says, like, how many of this are you?
Where are you? Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So I do that in my keynote. I do this big timeline thinking.
I love that.
That is great. I'm going to steal that. That's wonderful. I'll send you one. Send you one.
I love that.
So the timeline is the first piece. Like, where are you on your big, giant, messy timeline? Where does it fit in? And, when I work with groups, sometimes I do this like above the line, all the good stuff, like your resume goes above the line. And then under the line, I have them put all their the tough stuff they've been through. I call that your reverse resume. That's actually what builds who you really are, as opposed to the stuff above the line. And you can kind of see it like go up and down like as life builds through. So the timeline piece is the first part. And then the isolate is it's all one piece of paper. Take that timeline and draw wherever that dot is, draw a line in front of it and behind it, all the way through your paper, because that's where you are right now. You can't go back. If you live, the people who live, and you can't go forward. You have to isolate just where you are right now. Any good therapist will tell you that if you're living in the wish I'd have done this, wish things were different, should have done this, that's where depression lives. And if you're living in the I'm so worried about that, what if it's all ruined, what ifs in the future, that's where anxiety lives. So really all we have is the right now piece, like you and me right now in this connection. So the before is depression and the after is anxiety. So this magical isolated piece is what you have right now, and that's what you can actually take action on. That's the only thing you can control is the right now. So that's the isolate. And then I draw a circle around it, same piece of paper, draw a circle around that dot you put on there on the timeline, and figure out who's in this with you. Because when something happens, you feel like you're in that circle all by yourself, but someone's been through it before. Someone's seen it differently. Like we were talking about, like this is your whole world. You are definitely part 3 of my tips. So that people please, like, who do you need to bring in? Who do you need to kick out of your circle? Who's in this journey with you? You are the main character in this journey. Like, who's in there? And that's the people in the community and your ecosystem that needs to be built for you to have success. That's the people part.
I call it your rat pack.
I love it. Yes, your rat pack. I call it my crew with a K because I went to LSU and it's all Mardi Gras for me. It's my crew. Who's your crew? So that's the people piece. That's the circle around it. And then on that same piece of paper, or however you want to look at it, right, this is with a big blank after it. Because the 4th tip is the S in tips. It's story. And what's the story that this is going to be? The story that it is. The words in our head come out of our mouth, and that becomes our story. And we got to work on the words that are in our head, fix that language in our head so it comes out of our mouth in a way in which it can be helpful and not have all of this self-sabotage, the overgeneralization, catastrophizing, like this always happens, this is ruined, like all those bad things that happen in our head. That language needs to change. Part of what I talk about is you wouldn't talk to a kid that way. You certainly need to talk to yourself more like a child. Things aren't ruined. We don't jump to conclusions like they haven't texted me back in 10 minutes. They must hate me. Like, no, like whatever it is, like that, we all do that to ourselves. So all that self-sabotaging, exaggerating. I have 5 million things to do. Do you really? You really have 5 million things to do? And that our ability to work on the language in our head, and to make the language in our head what comes out of our mouth, and that becomes our story. And my most difficult times, I'm guilty as everybody else for doing this language. I thought everything was ruined and that I would never be happy again. That language never is really big. So yeah, it's the story piece is really key. I call it your ripple effect, because you say it out loud and then it's what people say about you and it becomes your story. If you get fired and you say this sucks and they're never going to make it without me and I hate these people and like all that becomes your story of being let go. Or if you say, wow, didn't see that coming. I'm going to have to find something else. Do you know anybody who's hiring, and good luck to everybody who's left there? Then that becomes your story.
Yeah.
It's just that language. So the language piece is really good. That's the story. So the tips, you can do them and you can look at them, those 4, and see which piece might be missing.
It's beautiful. It's creative. It's clever. It's easy to remember. The story piece I love so much, because similarly, just like expand and the connection cure, I always say that ripple effect it's hard to measure, but it's exponential in impact.
Yes.
Absolutely exists. And I also, as a storyteller, love to say we all have a story. What's your story? Own your story.
Yes.
And there's ownership, right? And there's agency in owning your story, and there's power to that.
Yeah. And I think you had probably the same experience I had by going down this journey and reverse engineering. Writing my first book was cathartic, to put it all together and do that homework and figure out what was actually had been going on with me at the time, the levels of PTSD and the cognitive behavior therapy, the chemicals in my brain, the amount of cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine that the rewiring that had gone on through the traumatic times in my life. It really was healthy to go back and do that. And that telling that story became a healthy thing for me to do, like so many people. Like if it's all just in your head, actually figuring out some words to tell your story is very, very healing.
Yes, I agree. And I had a doctor once diagnosed me with borderline personality disorder. That's real.
Yeah.
And I had to do dialectical behavioral therapy and CBT, and I went on there just to rewire and calm my nervous system and be able to begin to regulate and show up in the world. And so, what we're talking about, that switch, that climb out of that moment, it feels like end of the world, but there's so much more light in front of you.
Yeah, and that feels like the end of the world is so real.
Right.
And when you get on the other side of it, you look back and go, holy crap, like that felt really like the end. Like it truly felt like the end to me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have seen my kids grow up. I wouldn't have seen them go to high school or go off to college. I wouldn't, like, my daughter's in New York and I fly up there to visit her. Like, I wouldn't have done any of this. I would have been there to support them. I wouldn't have written this book. And I will tell you that, pay it forward and have it come back to you. I wrote the book in 2019, my first book. And you keep saying both my books are good. My second book kind of sucks, but the first one's really good. I'm really proud of it. The second one's too long. I use too many words. It's hard to write a short book, but the first one's really good. Yeah.
Well, that's because you wanted both.
Yes, exactly. So, the second one, the name of the second book is But I Want Both. But the first book is so good, and it's hard to write a short book. And I wrote it for people in the middle of a trauma, in the middle of going through a big this. And I mean, it starts out with, well, this is a crappy way to meet you. Like that's the first line of the book.
Yeah.
But to have that, just a couple of people early on in 2019 when I wrote it, complete strangers shoot me a note and say, hey, for the first time, I didn't want to take my own life today. Thank you. I thought, I got to tap out right now. Like I made a difference on the planet in that one person. And that's all it takes to know that, it was worth it for the time and energy for me to reverse engineer and help. And it has helped a lot of people through the years. My daughter will say, like when she was in college, she would do chapter 6 on her friends. She's like, my friends all think that life is over because they got drunk at a party or they're failing a class or like they think life is over and they're so dramatic. She's like, I do chapter 6 on people every day, Mom. So my chapter 6 thinking, she calls it.
I love that. It reminds me of the chapter 5 in the sense of how they refer to it in the AA. uh, how it works.
Yeah.
Um, so I disagree on your second book, but we can agree to disagree.
It could
And
be, it just needs work. I need to take it. I need to run back through it and make it better. I don't love
and
it.
we share actually something in common about that. So I wrote a children's picture book series called Sterling the Knight, about young Sterling, who the book series helps children socially and emotionally develop skills that they'll need in life going into the adults. And for those adults like myself, it's lessons you could always relearn.
Yeah.
We share the same publisher, Morgan James.
Oh, that's cool. I loved
Right.
working with them.
Yes, right.
They made me
Um,
take all the curse words out of my book, though, which was it was like a challenge that when I wrote it, I was very much
yeah.
me. And I worked in a newsroom. I cursed like a sailor, but I had to be it was hard to come up with other language, but it was a wonderful exercise in trying to do that. But I loved Morgan James. I think that they're a great group to work with.
Yeah, but it's funny now. Every book that I see coming out, every cover is like "F this" or "Your life is effed" or
Yes.
"F you" anybody like it, with asterisks
Yeah.
and things
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that nature. You also have a podcast like I do. Your podcast funnily says, this podcast sucks. No, it's
No, it does at times, but it's called This Seriously Sucked. I won't lie. I won't lie. It does at times. It's not
I
always great.
love you. It's
But
so funny. This seriously sucks podcast.
The right podcast when life goes seriously wrong. So it's
That's
This
so
Seriously
good.
Sucks.
That's so funny.
This Seriously Sucks. And one thing that's really been, I use it for research, for my speaking and for my work. I get to meet some amazing people and their stories become stories I can share. But everybody on my podcast has to be 10 years past whatever big this they went through. So I say you speak from your scars, not your wounds. And I won't even let anybody be on unless they're 10 years past it. And I've had Joe Delagrave, who's a three-time Paralympian, and now he's the head coach for the Paralympic rugby team. But he was a college athlete and became paralyzed. But 10 years past, like to tell, how do you get through that? Like, what an amazing dude. And he's as tall as I am, seated in his chair. He's like tatted up and jacked. And like, how do you do that? So his story, people like that, people who've lost children, people who've been incarcerated or addicts, and, all sorts of people who have been 10 years past, whatever their big this is. But yes, This Seriously Sucks.
I love that. That's a great experience. So I'll end with this, Nina. And I ask all my guests because similarly situated, really phenomenally impactful people who are doing just so much good in the world beyond being a mom and an author and a podcast host and a framework creator and just getting through our lives ourselves through the challenges of every day. How does Nina most authentically connect with herself?
This is going to sound strange to some people. I live near the beach, so I'll walk on the beach and I build sand castles and do things. But honestly, I connect with myself the most when I'm in the gym. I love being in the gym. I love just pushing. I like being with Nina with my headphones on in the gym and working out and seeing how hard I can go and how heavy I can go. And I like that time for me. It is self-love for me. I've been an athlete, so it's something I enjoy. I'm like, even the smell of the gym. I like all the things most people hate. That is my time for me. I connect most. I'm kind to myself in the gym. I'm also hard on myself in the gym. I think through things in the gym, but that's really my time for me. I did distance cycling for a while. I used to say my time on the bike was where I really connected with myself the most. I'm not doing as much of that. But mine's usually through physical activity where it's just me and my body and my brain. And that's where I reset alone. As much as I love connecting, you're great. Like, I love the energy. I energize around people. But when I get in touch with myself, it's me alone, usually sweating.
Nina, I love that you are so embracing all of your energy, all of your both sides of your energies, your wholeheartedness. You are a beautiful person inside and out. And thank you for sharing your time with me today. I could not be more grateful. This moment was a moment I won't forget on my ruler. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. As far as this moment goes, you talk about your story. So if we're in the books, our books, your book of your life and your book of my life, like this right now, if we open both our books to a page today, this is our crossover moment, like where the Flash is up on Supergirl. Like we're having this crossover episode. So
cool.
I'm so excited to be part of your crossover moment. So thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This has been really great. I hope that we stay connected and do more in the future.
I want to extend my deepest gratitude to you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow us on your favorite platform or share this episode with a friend. You can also follow me on Instagram at Judd Shaw Official. A special thank you to personal injury law firm Judd Shaw Injury Law for their support in helping us bring this podcast to life. Remember, friends, authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about embracing our vulnerabilities, celebrating our strengths, and owning our stories. Until next time.